Joel Osteen's Lakewood Church in Houston about 2 weeks ago, who brought her 7-year-old son with her. The child was shot and remains in critical condition.
On the surface, Lakewood Church still looks like one of the most successful megachurches in the world, drawing thousands every Sunday and reaching millions through television. But behind that polished image, something unsettling has begun to surface. Attendance patterns are shifting. Donations are no longer as strong as before, and longtime viewers are quietly drifting away. Joel Osteen remains steady on stage, but subtle cracks are forming beneath the surface of the empire he built. Inside the Lakewood Church incident no one expected. On a Sunday in early 2024, Lakewood Church in Houston was preparing for what should have been an ordinary Spanish-language service. The building was already filling with volunteers, staff, and early attendees, completely unaware that within minutes, the atmosphere inside one of America's largest megachurches would shift into chaos. A 36-year-old woman named Janice Yvonne Moreno arrived at the west entrance in a white SUV shortly before the service began. With her was her 7-year-old son, quietly sitting in the back seat. On the outside, nothing about the moment seemed unusual, but what she was carrying inside the vehicle told a very different story. She entered the church premises wearing a long coat that concealed a rifle, moving with a level of determination that would soon shock everyone inside. The first confrontation happened near the entrance, where a church greeter tried to respond to the situation. In a matter of seconds, the situation escalated, and she managed to move further into the building's interior corridors. What followed unfolded extremely fast. Gunfire erupted inside the church hallway just outside the main sanctuary. Panic spread immediately as people scrambled for cover, turning a place known for worship and celebration into a scene of confusion and fear. 2 off-duty law enforcement officers were inside the building at the time and responded as soon as the situation became clear. Within minutes, the confrontation ended when the woman was shot and killed on the spot. But the aftermath revealed something even more painful. During the exchange, her young son was critically injured, along with a church volunteer who was also caught in the crossfire. The child was rushed to Texas Children's Hospital, where doctors performed emergency procedures in an attempt to save his life. His condition was described as critical, requiring multiple urgent surgeries and intensive care. As news spread, more details began to surface about warning signs that had existed long before that day. Reports suggested that concerns about mental health issues and firearm access had been raised by family members and documented in prior complaints. Some even claimed attempts were made to alert institutions connected to the situation, raising difficult questions about whether those warnings were ever fully acted upon. And then came the question that made the situation even more uncomfortable. How could an institution as large and well-funded as Lakewood Church, capable of hosting thousands every week, still be vulnerable at its own doors? Why did a building designed to welcome massive crowds appear unprepared for something of this scale? Those questions didn't fade after the incident. Instead, they grew louder, pulling attention away from just one tragic event and toward a much bigger issue hidden beneath it. Because what happened that day was no longer seen as an isolated incident. It was the first moment that forced people to look closer at the systems, the leadership, and the structure behind Lakewood Church itself. And as that scrutiny deepened, it began pointing all the way back to how Joel Osteen's entire empire was built in the first place. And that story starts long before the arenas and television broadcasts, back to a small, unexpected beginning that no one thought would grow this large. From shy boy to church leader. Long before Joel Osteen became widely known, he was not the public voice drawing attention. Instead, he worked quietly behind the scenes, deliberately staying out of the spotlight. His early years were shaped within a church that was still small, uncertain, and striving to establish its identity in Houston. During this period, he focused on support roles rather than leadership, gradually becoming part of the foundation that would later support the church's rapid growth and public prominence. Lakewood Church itself began under his father, John Osteen, who started preaching after a dramatic shift in his spiritual beliefs. What began as a modest congregation in a renovated feed store slowly developed into a growing local ministry. At the time, nobody could have predicted it would one day become one of the largest churches in America. Joel grew up inside that environment, but he was never naturally drawn to preaching. Unlike his father, he was quiet, reserved, and uncomfortable speaking in front of crowds. After finishing high school in 1981, he briefly attempted college studies in media and communication, but did not complete them. Instead, he returned home and stepped into a role that would define his early career in an unexpected way. For years, Joel worked behind the camera, managing production for his father's televised sermons. He handled editing, filming, and broadcasting details, learning how messages were shaped not just through words, but through presentation. In many ways, he was studying ministry without ever standing on a pulpit. He has even stated in interviews that he never attended formal seminary training, and most of his understanding of preaching came from observing and editing his father's messages. Despite repeated encouragement from his father, Joel consistently refused to take over preaching responsibilities. He remained behind the scenes for nearly 2 decades, comfortable in a role that kept him out of direct public pressure. That changed dramatically in 1999. After years of hesitation, Joel finally agreed to deliver a sermon. It was a moment that would quietly shift the direction of his entire life. At the same time, his father's health was declining rapidly, and within days of Joel's first sermon, John Osteen passed away. The timing was sudden, emotional, and deeply symbolic for the congregation watching the transition unfold. With that, leadership of Lakewood Church passed to Joel almost immediately. He inherited a congregation of thousands, but without the preaching experience or formal theological background many expected from a senior pastor. Inside the church, doubts began to surface about whether he could sustain what his father had built. But what happened next surprised nearly everyone. Instead of slowing down, Lakewood began to grow at a remarkable pace under Joel's leadership. Attendance increased, television broadcasts expanded, and the church's visibility across the country began to rise. Within just a few years, what once felt like an uncertain transition started to look like a full transformation. And as the audience grew larger and the message spread further, Joel Osteen was no longer just the shy man behind the camera. He was becoming the face of one of the fastest-growing churches in America. But that rapid rise was only the beginning of a much bigger shift, one that would soon move Lakewood from a local ministry into a global stage built on scale, influence, and ambition. The bold move that redefined Joel Osteen's church. By the early 2000s, Lakewood Church had outgrown its original space, and the pressure of rising attendance made expansion unavoidable. What came next was a decision that would completely reshape the church's identity and push it into a new level of visibility. Joel Osteen and his leadership team turned their attention to a massive opportunity in downtown Houston, the former Compaq Center. Once home to professional basketball games, the arena had been sitting in transition, with plans floating around to demolish it or convert it into commercial office space. But Lakewood saw something different. They saw scale, potential, and a future far beyond a traditional church building. After a long and costly process involving legal disputes and negotiations, the church secured a long-term lease and committed tens of millions of dollars to transform the arena. The renovation was extensive. Entire sections were rebuilt, new floors were added, and the space was redesigned to support both worship services and global broadcasting. Advanced lighting systems, production studios, classrooms, and modern architectural features turned the building into something that no longer resembled a typical church at all. When Lakewood officially opened the doors in 2005, the transformation was undeniable. The 16,000-seat venue was filled to capacity, and millions more tuned in through television broadcasts. What had once been a sports arena was now a fully operational worship center designed for massive audiences. But the scale of the project was only part of the story. because this wasn't just about building a bigger church. It was about building a presence that could reach far beyond Houston, positioning Lakewood as a global name in modern Christianity. And once that stage was set, the real question became unavoidable. How does a church that large sustain itself? And what happens when faith, influence, and money start growing at the same time? Inside the money machine of a mega church. As Lakewood Church expanded into a global name, attention naturally shifted towards something less visible but far more powerful: the money behind it all. The scale of the operation was massive, the audience was worldwide, and the influence was undeniable. But the financial structure supporting it was far more complex than most people realized. Joel Osteen has publicly stated that he does not receive a salary from Lakewood Church, a claim that is technically accurate since the mid-2000s. However, that statement only tells part of the story. His income does not come from the church payroll. Instead, it comes from a wide network of publishing deals, speaking engagements, and brand-driven ventures that extend far beyond the church walls. It all began in 2004 with his first book, Your Best Life Now. The release quickly became a publishing phenomenon, selling hundreds of thousands of copies within months. Before long, it had crossed the million-copy mark and remained on bestseller lists for years. The success transformed Joel from a local pastor into a global author with an audience far beyond Sunday services. That momentum continued with more books, speaking tours, and international appearances. Reports estimate that his speaking fees can range from hundreds of thousands of dollars per event. His Night of Hope tours filled stadiums across the United States and abroad, drawing massive crowds willing to pay for admission. Venues like Yankee Stadium, Dodger Stadium, and arenas in London became part of his global reach, turning preaching into a large-scale touring experience. But the financial story doesn't end with books and events. Internal financial reports from Lakewood revealed that the church operates on a budget that can reach tens of millions annually. However, critics have pointed out a striking imbalance between total revenue and spending on direct outreach programs. Some watchdog organizations have even questioned the level of transparency in how funds are distributed, raising concerns about whether financial priorities align with public expectations. At the same time, Lakewood's media presence, television broadcasts, and digital reach continue to grow, turning the church into a highly polished production brand. Every service is broadcast globally, every message is packaged for mass consumption, and every event contributes to a system that blends ministry with media at an unprecedented scale. And yet, for many supporters, the image remains simple: faith, hope, and inspiration delivered every Sunday. But behind that simplicity lies a much larger question that continues to follow the organization. Because when faith becomes a global brand and influence turns into revenue streams, the line between ministry and enterprise starts to blur. And as more details about spending, transparency, and leadership decisions begin to surface, the next layer of the story becomes impossible to ignore. What happens when those closest to the pulpit also become part of the controversy itself? The scandals surrounding Joel Osteen's inner circle. While Joel Osteen became the public face of Lakewood Church, another key figure quietly stood beside him in shaping its image: his wife, Victoria Osteen. Their relationship began long before the global spotlight, when Joel walked into a small jewelry store in Houston in the mid-1980s. Victoria, working behind the counter, would later become both his partner in life and a co-leader in the church's expanding influence. As Lakewood grew, Victoria stepped into a more visible role. She was introduced as co-pastor and began speaking publicly, writing books, and appearing regularly on stage alongside Joel. Her presence helped reinforce the church's message of positivity and emotional encouragement, adding another layer to Lakewood's public identity. But one moment would change how many people viewed her entirely. In 2005, Victoria was involved in a dispute during a flight from Houston to Colorado. According to reports from a flight attendant, an argument escalated over a seating issue, leading to allegations of physical contact. The incident was later reviewed by aviation authorities, resulting in a fine for interference with a crew member. However, when the case went to court, a jury ultimately ruled in her favor. Years later, another moment would spark even wider debate. In 2014, during a Lakewood church service, Victoria delivered a short but widely shared message encouraging people to prioritize happiness and fulfillment. Standing next to Joel in front of thousands, her remarks quickly circulated online, drawing both support and criticism. Some viewed it as uplifting encouragement, while others saw it as a clear reflection of the church's broader prosperity-focused message. The clip spread rapidly across social media, turning a brief statement into a global discussion about the theology behind Lakewood's teachings. And as criticism grew louder, attention began shifting away from individual moments and towards something much larger, the recurring patterns behind them. Because it was no longer just about isolated controversies or viral clips. A deeper question was forming underneath it all. Was there a consistent way Lakewood responded whenever public pressure began to rise? And the answer, as events would soon reveal, followed a pattern that critics had been pointing out for years, a pattern that would become impossible to ignore. When controversies started following a formula, over time, observers began noticing something unusual about how Lakewood Church responded to public criticism. It wasn't just about isolated incidents anymore. It was about the way each situation seemed to follow a familiar rhythm, almost as if the responses were part of a system, rather than separate reactions. In 2017, during Hurricane Harvey in Houston, Lakewood Church faced criticism after devastating floods left families stranded while attention turned to its large facility as a potential shelter. The church initially said the building was inaccessible due to flooding, sparking backlash online as photos suggested nearby roads were clear. Public pressure eventually led to it opening. Case in 2014 involved reported theft of cash and checks from the facility, later revived after discovery inside a wall cavity, raising security questions. Then came the pandemic-era controversy. Lakewood Church received a multi-million-dollar government relief loan under the Paycheck Protection Program. The decision drew criticism due to the church's already significant financial capacity. Although the loan was later repaid, the public debate had already intensified, with questions being raised about eligibility and necessity. Across all three situations, critics pointed to a familiar pattern: initial hesitation, followed by explanation, and then eventual action only after public pressure increased. Supporters, however, argued that each situation had context and complexity that outsiders did not fully understand. But as these moments accumulated, they began forming a bigger picture that was hard to ignore. It wasn't just about how Lakewood responded to individual crises anymore. It was about what those responses revealed about the structure behind the organization itself. And once that realization took hold, attention naturally shifted again, this time away from events and toward something far more foundational: the message being preached from the pulpit every Sunday, and whether it could withstand the weight of the criticism growing around it. Is it faith or something else? At the center of every discussion about Joel Osteen is not just the church, the money, or the controversies, but the message itself. For years, his preaching has focused on hope, positivity, and the belief that better days are always ahead. Millions have found comfort in that approach, especially during difficult times. But not everyone sees it the same way. Critics argue that the foundation of his message leans heavily toward prosperity theology, a teaching style that emphasizes personal success, happiness, and blessings as signs of faith. Some theologians have pushed back strongly against this interpretation, saying it shifts the focus of Christianity away from deeper spiritual principles and toward material and emotional outcomes. Well-known religious scholars have publicly challenged this approach, calling it overly simplified and emotionally driven. They argue that while the message is uplifting, it may leave out the more difficult and complex aspects of traditional theology. In their view, faith becomes something centered on personal gain rather than spiritual depth. Joel Osteen himself has often avoided direct theological debates. In interviews, he has openly stated that he does not consider himself a traditional theologian and prefers not to engage in doctrinal arguments. His focus, instead, has remained on encouragement and practical inspiration rather than academic or doctrinal discussion. This has created a clear divide in how his ministry is perceived. Supporters see him as a messenger of hope in a world filled with negativity, someone who brings comfort to millions who might otherwise feel disconnected from traditional church settings. Critics, however, believe the simplicity of the message raises deeper concerns about what is being emphasized and what may be missing, and that tension continues to follow him to this day. Because as Lakewood Church continues to fill stadiums, broadcast globally, and reach millions online, the same question keeps resurfacing beneath the surface. Is this simply modern faith designed for a modern audience? Or has something fundamental about the message been reshaped along the way? And depending on who you ask, the answer changes completely. That's the story behind Joel Osteen and Lakewood Church. Share your thoughts below, subscribe for more deep dives, and stay tuned for the next story that challenges what you think you know.